welcome. I'm Masuma Katauka and you're watching World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. China has issued a bold warning to the United States ahead of the Trump-Xi meeting. Foreign Minister Wang Yi has declared that a multipolar world is coming. He has also stated that the United States is politicizing the trade. US President Donald Trump has said that he expects the United States and China to come away with a deal as he prepares to meet President Xi Jinping in South Korea this week. Speaking aboard Air Force One, Trump has said that he has a lot of respect for President Xi as he continues his Asia tour. After US has slammed Russia on the test of Burevestnik missile, Russia counters by saying it notified US in advance. Kremlin has also stated that it is guided by their own national interest and there is nothing to strain relations with Washington. French police have arrested two suspects linked to the $102 million Louvre jewel heist, one of whom was about to flee to Algeria, according to Paris prosecutor. However, the Paris prosecutor has condemned the leak of the arrest, warning it could hinder the work of over 100 investigators searching for the stolen crown jewels, which remain missing. The UN had called for an immediate ceasefire in El Fasher, warning that civilians are cut off from food, healthcare, and safe escape routes as fighting intensifies. Aid agencies say targeted attacks on hospitals and humanitarian workers are deepening the crisis. Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has said that US President Donald Trump has assured him a trade agreement that can be reached to ease punitive tariffs. Lula spoke after meeting Trump on the sidelines of Southeast Asian Summit. Hurricane Melissa has now intensified into a Category 4 storm with winds of 220 kilometers per hour, threatening Jamaica and Cuba with catastrophic floods, landslides, and storm surges. While Jamaican Prime Minister Andy Holness has ordered mandatory evacuations in 7 areas as authorities opened 900 shelters and closed both international airports. Lithuanian Prime Minister Inga Rugini has announced that Lithuania will shoot down smuggler balloons from Belarus after 4 airspace closures in a week caused by contraband-laden air balloons. The Prime Minister has warned Belarus that this may invoke NATO Article 4 security consultations. Now we start from China. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has stated that President Xi Jinping and US President Donald Trump respect each other. The statement comes as Beijing expresses hope that China and the United States will prepare for future leaders' interactions. According to reports, the minister has emphasized the importance of dialogue and cooperation between the two nations. In another development, China's Foreign Minister has held a phone call with US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Wang Yi has told Rubio that through the Kuala Lumpur economic and trade talks, the two sides have reached a framework consensus on reciprocal solutions to current pressing economic and trade issues. These comments from Wang Yi come ahead of a key meeting between US President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping later this week in South Korea. Trump is currently out on an Asia tour with talks focused on easing tensions over trade tariff disputes. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and China's Vice Premier He Lifeng have already held 2 days of discussions on trade and tariffs. Now for this discussion, we welcome John Rossomando. He's a president of Viking Research Associates and geopolitical expert, joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, John, for joining us again. Good to see you. John, looking at this, how might China's emphasis, today a lot of statements have come in, but one of them was China's emphasis on a multipolar world. How do you think this would be taken by President Trump or U.S., and how would it affect U.S.-China relations?
Well, let's put it this way. It's just more of the same. China talks about a multipolar world, and the Chinese and the BRICS nations replacing the U.S. By all intents and purposes, the effort by the BRICS countries to displace the U.S. dollar won't be anytime soon. It could be more than a decade or more before they're able to have enough economic heft to do so. I think that President Trump, should be focusing on bolstering, U.S. Primacy, but also at the same time trying to avoid war or further disruptions between the U.S. and China and its allies.
And John, now looking at Chinese foreign minister's call to avoid politicizing trade for ongoing tariff and economic negotiations, how do you think, what are the implications of his call?
Well, I think the implications for the discussions of trade and tariffs is getting the Chinese to stop their protectionism, to allow the increase of U.S. Goods into their markets, and to solve the trade imbalance between our two countries. Let's not forget that President Trump's first term was dedicated to resolving the issues between the United States and China over China dumping goods in the U.S. and having a massive trade surplus.
And how do you think it is now? Do you think President Trump and President Xi Jinping, the upcoming dialogue, could influence future trade talks and U.S.'s position to make it better in these?
Well, I don't see any much hope for anything concrete coming out of this, because the United States and China are so far apart in terms of their economic goals. I mean, China wants to maintain its position as this world's manufacturing hub. So President Trump wants to onshore manufacturing from overseas to the U.S.
And how could this dialogue between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump influence future multilateral trade agreements between these two countries?
Well, I think that, excuse me, I think that President Trump is trying to get a more equitable deal, but I'm not optimistic. I mean, the Chinese have their way of thinking about things, and I don't see that changing anytime soon.
And lastly, in what ways might China's stance against bullying through power affect regional security and diplomatic strategies within Asia?
Well, I think that China is just going to continue its belligerence toward its neighbors like the Philippines, continue its threats to quote-unquote unified China by taking Taiwan, its belligerence against Vietnam. And one of the things that President Trump has done, with his antagonism toward India, is potentially destabilize some of the effort to contain China.
Thank you very much, John Rosamondo, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we stay on the region. Now, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has stated that he is ready to talk with the U.S. President Donald Trump after U.S. hiked tariffs on Canadian goods by additional 10%. Carney has stated that we stand ready to sit down with the United States. Let's listen in to what he has said.
We stand ready to sit down with the United States, myself with the President, my colleagues with their colleagues, when the U.S. is ready to sit down. As I always would be, as you would expect. As President of the United States, so of course, make myself available and make myself available for other world leaders as they wish to. We will both be in APEC. Canada is a member of APEC. I mean,
Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has stated that he had terminated all trade talks with Canada, as he called it a fake advertisement campaign. Now, for this discussion, we go back to John Rossomando. He's the president of Viking Research Associates, geopolitical expert, joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, John, for staying with us. Now, looking at this, should Canada continue to seek negotiations with U.S.?
Well, the Canadians, definitely need to keep President Trump on their side, because the United States is Canada's largest trading partner. Our economies are intertwined. Similar cultures, similar backgrounds. American industries like the auto industry have been part of Canada's economy for over 100 years, and Canada cannot survive, with American tariffs the way that they are. I mean, there might be a lot of hyperbole and so forth with regard to, finding partners in Europe or with China, but they cannot replace the United States.
And what role should provincial governments like Ontario in Canada, as the advertisement was from there, so how should that play in shaping Canada's international trade relations with U.S.?
Well, Canada, rather Ontario, provides, the power and electricity to New York and a good portion of the northeastern United States. So I think that, there's a lot of, it has leverage. They've been saying that, if we don't, cave when it comes to tariffs, that they'll cut off the power. So I think that we need to move beyond, some of this belligerency and try to find a solution that works for both sides.
And how could the use of political advertisement, such as the one featuring President Ronald Reagan, influence diplomatic relations between these two nations?
Well, I think that it's not going to have much of an impact on Trump, because, the only person that has an impact on Trump is himself. The thing that, Trump's movement is, it's a reaction against Reagan's offshoring of American industrial base. This Trumpian protectionism is, a reaction against the sort of, free trade rhetoric that goes back to the Reagan era.
And to what extent do high tariffs align with or contradict the principles of free trade, historically supported by leaders like Reagan?
Well, the entire, tariffs, getting rid of tariffs was the whole free trade deal. However, we've seen that not all countries have, played by the rules. China maintains high tariffs. President Trump has railed against India's high tariffs, for example. And, there's a belief among some on the right in the United States that increasing American tariffs to be reciprocal with those of our trading partners will get them to make concessions. However, that doesn't seem to be happening.
And thank you very much, John Rossomando, for joining us today and sharing that insight and staying with us throughout this news. Now we move on to Middle East. Israel has firmly rejected the presence of Turkish armed forces in Gaza, following reports that a U.S. peace plan for the region includes an international force to help secure a ceasefire. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar stated that Israel would not accept Turkish troops, citing the hostile stance of President Erdogan's government during the Gaza conflict. Let's listen into this full statement.
With regard to Turkey, why we are against the participation of Turkey in Gaza? So I would say that countries that once are ready to send armed forces should be at least fair to Israel. They shouldn't be so supportive maybe, but they shouldn't be hostile to Israel. Unfortunately, and mainly during the last 2 years, but even before that, Turkey led by Erdogan, led hostile approach against Israel, included not only hostile statements, but also diplomatic and economic measures against Israel. So it is not reasonable for us to let their armed forces enter to Gaza Strip, and we will not agree to that, and we said it to our...
The U.S. plan envisions the deployment of troops from countries like Indonesia, Egypt, and Qatar, but the participation of Turkey remains a point of contention. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has also expressed opposition to Turkish involvement, asserting that Israel would determine which foreign forces could enter Gaza. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mohammed Osman. He's an international relations specialist, joins us live from Cairo. Thank you very much, Mohammed Osman, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now,
it's a pleasure to be with you, Asuma.
Thank you very much. Looking at this, why do you think there's hostility or contention from Israeli side towards Turkish forces or Turkish troops entering Gaza?
Well, Turkey has taken a very vocal stance against Israel since the war in Gaza began, and even before that, Turkey and Israel's relationship has witnessed a significant amount of tension due to both competing over influence, of course, in Syria after the fall of the Assad regime, which both of them were allies in, ironically, and also because of how Israel treats the Palestinians. This is something that has caused great dismay to the Turkish government, and the Turkish government also plays the solidarity with Palestine card in order to gain favor with its own public opinion, which is very, very strongly pro-Palestinian. But on the other hand, Turkey has a very deep-rooted relationship with Israel. Turkey is the first country in the Islamic world to recognize Israel back in the 1950s. And historically, Turkey has always been an ally of Israel against many Arab countries in the region. But of course now Turkey under Erdogan, it might be a bit different, but still trade between both countries is large. They both maintain diplomatic relations. So there is a tension, some sort of tension in Turkish-Israeli relations, but that does not mean that they are enemies. What Netanyahu is doing, Asuma, basically, he is making up pretexts and coming up with issues in order to obstruct the implementation of the plan. So he was okay with Turkey coming in as a mediator. And at the beginning, they were also okay with Turkey joining the peacekeeping force or the international stabilization force that is supposed to be deployed in Gaza in accordance with the Trump plan and the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement. Now suddenly Israel discovers that Turkey is not an acceptable participant to have in the international stabilization force. And okay, so Turkey is not going to join because the United States said that they will not impose the participation of any certain country in the international stabilization force. However, of course, the deployment of this force remains to be very questionable at the moment. So many details have not been worked out yet, Suma. Egypt, for example, and other countries, and the Palestinians as well, the Palestinian factions, including Hamas, insist that the deployment of such a force has to be authorized by a UN Security Council resolution and granted a UN mandate, basically a mandate by the UN. This is something that the United States did not reject, but they did not accept it either. They said that they will discuss it. Marco Rubio said he will discuss this with the other partners. And of course, the Israelis, even though they did not announce their stance, they are very strongly opposed to the idea of the deployment of any forces under UN mandate in the Palestinian occupied territories. So it seems they are trying to delay this discussion, Asuma, by making a fuss, excuse my colloquial description here, about the possible participation of Turkey. And after Turkey is completely disqualified from participating in this force, the Israelis will try to find another reason, yet another reason, to obstruct the implementation of the second phase of the deal. Because Israel, deep inside Asuma, wants somewhere down the line to restart the war in Gaza once more and the deployment of international peacekeepers will definitely make that much, much harder for Israel to do.
And do you think, how does it affect moving forward with all the reasons you've mentioned, and what could be potential regional implication if Turkey keeps insisting on participating as a force in Gaza?
Turkey can insist all at once. It cannot force itself upon this force, basically, because Turkey is not that significant of a player inside Palestine, for example. The presence of Turkey is not that instrumental in order for the plan to move forward. So I don't think that Turkey will try to force itself upon its participation upon the Israelis. And also, it's not only up to the Israelis to accept it or not. The question lies with the Americans. The Americans are the only ones, are the only arbiters who can dictate conditions at this point when it comes to Gaza, it seems. And so far, the Americans have said that they are not going to impose any country on Israel against its will as a participant in the peacekeeping force. So it seems that we will not have a problem with what Turkey thinks. And I don't think that Turkey is very eager, really, to get into a confrontation or a losing confrontation or a losing battle. If the Americans say, no, you cannot deploy troops, then they cannot deploy troops. And at the same time, Turkey is interested in maintaining the calm in the region, because ending the war in Gaza, Turkey played an instrumental role, along with Egypt and Qatar, in reaching the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement as a mediator. So if they decide to obstruct the implementation of the agreement they participated or played a role in mediating, it will basically diminish their credibility as a regional power. So I don't think Turkey will be a troublemaker at this point. The only troublemaker we have in this calculation is Israel. Israel is even obstructing, according to reports, the deployment of the Palestinian Authority police forces that have been trained in Egypt and Jordan. According to the Trump plan and the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement, those police forces, about 7,000 of them, if I'm not mistaken, should be deployed in Gaza in order to oversee security and maintain public order. However, Israel so far has not allowed them to enter. Even Israel has not even allowed the opening of the Rafah border crossing yet, which requires the deployment of Palestinian Authority forces and officers and the EU observation mission on the Palestinian side of the Rafah border crossing. And for this to happen, of course, Israel has to withdraw from around the border crossing. Unfortunately, this has not materialized yet, and Israel is still obstructing the implementation. And of course, they are using the delay in the delivery of the bodies of the remaining dead hostages as a pretext in order to further obstruct and delay the implementation of the agreement. They are biding for time, and that they think that time is on their side, because of course, as long as reconstruction is stalled and the implementation of the plan is stalled, the possibility of war rises once again, and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza will also deepen in the absence of the delivery of the adequate amounts of humanitarian aid and the beginning of early recovery and reconstruction. All are things that Israel is betting on delaying in order to deepen the humanitarian crisis and eventually force the Palestinians in Gaza, or at least huge parts of the chunks of them, to leave Gaza, which is the end game of Israel's strategy in the occupied Palestinian territories at this point.
And lastly, Osman, what role can other countries like Indonesia, Qatar, and of course Egypt play to ensure the ceasefire is effective? Although you've mentioned all the reasons why Israel would try to make sure that it doesn't go forward, or phase 2 doesn't start.
Well, countries like Egypt, like Indonesia, and like Qatar, and also the European countries, by the way, not only countries in the region, are working very, very diligently, and Jordan as well, by the way, diligently behind the scenes through their communications with the Americans to stabilize this agreement and ensure its implementation. Because they have one thing going for them in their favor, Asuma, and that is the United States so far is very interested and committed to the implementation of this peace plan and to the preservation of the ceasefire and the prevention of any future hostilities. So they are taking advantage of that by trying to convince the Americans to apply more pressure on the Israelis. This has had various degrees of success. For example, it succeeded in convincing the Americans to apply actual pressure on Israel to accept the ceasefire, to withdraw to the yellow line, and also not to annex the West Bank. The Americans were very vocal about that. Trump went as far as to threaten the Israelis that they will lose all support if they annex the West Bank. So this is on the positive side. However, on the negative side, the United States has not exerted the significant or the needed amount of pressure in order for Israel to uphold the remaining provisions or remaining obligations of this agreement. So I think that in the near future, countries, as you mentioned, like Indonesia, Qatar, and Egypt, and many European countries, and Jordan, will play a much more active role in their communications and consultations with the United States in order to push the implementation of this agreement forward. And probably the United States will reciprocate in order to preserve the ceasefire in Gaza. However, I do not expect the U.S. to force Israel to comply with everything at this point.
With that, I would like to thank Mohammed Osman for joining us and sharing that insight. Thank you very much. Now we move on to Europe. A Ukrainian drone attack has killed 2 people and injured 1 in the Russian-controlled Donetsk region. The drone strike occurred overnight and caused a fire in a residential building. According to national authorities, the victims of the drone attack are 2 women aged 72 and 98, while a 19-year-old woman is also injured. Let's now listen in to a family member of the victims.
Я уснула, была ночь, 11:30, услышала грохот. Проснулась, выскочила в коридор. Муж мне говорит: подожди, сейчас еще бахнет. Я выглянула в окно, вот тут вот в этом вот палисадничек что-то горит. Я выскочила на улицу прямо в ночной рубашке, глянула на окно, горят окна квартиры моих родителей.
Она меня отдала.
Мы поднялись наверх с мужем. Папа там стоял в квартире. Мы его вытащили на площадку, на лестничную.
However, there has been no immediate comment from Ukraine regarding this incident. Donetsk is one of 4 Ukrainian regions partly occupied and claimed by Russia in 2022, which is a move that has been repeatedly condemned as illegal by the international community, including UN General Assembly. Now we move on to Asia. An Afghan women's refugee team has lost 6-1 to Chad in a FIFA-organized tournament in Morocco. But for the players, the match itself represented a victory after being denied the chance to play the sport they love in Afghanistan. Women's sport has been banned in Afghanistan since the Taliban government took over in 2021, prompting players to flee the country fearing persecution. Prior to the Taliban's takeover, Afghanistan had 25 women players under contract, most of whom now live in Australia. The women's national team last played in an international match in 2021, losing 5-0 to Qatar. However, in May, the World Football Governing Body approved the creation of an Afghan women's refugee team, with Pauline Hamil named as coach. The team chose Afghan Women United as their official name following consultations with FIFA. The team captain Fatima Haidari has said that this is what the team has ever wanted all these years, right? To play as a woman and to represent Afghanistan. She further expressed gratitude towards FIFA for the opportunity. Let's listen into what Fatima has said.
I think it's a clear message to the world that if women want to do anything in their life, not just an athlete path, to be equal in the society as men, especially in sports field. And countries like Afghanistan that didn't have the opportunity these many years, it made this dream come true.
That's all we have time for. Keep watching News X World for more news updates from around the world.